Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're talking about sexual health as we continue our examination of health and healing in the Bible. And sexual health is hardly ever talked about in churches, yet it's so important. And the Word of God has a lot to say about it. We're going to look into that. We're going to just dive right into it. And we're going to start here in Exodus chapter 19, 11 through 15. It lays us kind of the foundation of where to get started. And be ready against the third day. For the third day, the Lord will come down the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And you shall set bound to the people round about, saying, take heed to yourselves that you go not up into the mount or touch the border of it. Whosoever touch the mount shall be surely put to death. There shall not be a hand to touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, or be man or beast, and it shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up to the mount. And Moses went down from the mount of the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. He said to the people, be ready against the third day, come not at your wives. Now this is when they're beginning to get, technically the first part of the law they got were the commandments concerning Passover. But this is when they're about to get the 10 commandments. And they're meeting with the Lord in a very special way. And because of that, they have to be in a clean state. So he said they're commanded to come not at their wives, which means don't approach your wives for sex. Okay? And we'll get into why, but notice that when you're meeting the Lord in a special way, because remember, he's everywhere all the time. But when you're separating yourself to be closer to him in a special way, then the commandment was, don't come to your wives, don't approach them for sex. For 3 days here. Now, Deuteronomy 23, 10 through 11, we're continuing some more about this ideal of sex, about sex and cleanness. If there be any man among you not clean by reason of uncleanness, the chances of at night, he shall go abroad out of the camp, he shall not come within the camp. And it shall be when the evening comes, he shall wash himself with water. When the sun is down, he shall come into the camp again. Okay, remember we talked about unclean and what that means in the Bible. And remember, you can't when you're going to approach God in a special way, and it's separated, not the normal, just because he is everywhere, but you're going to separate yourself in some way. You have to, in this case, in Israel's case, God would sometimes literally, because of the pillar of fire in the middle of the camp was the tabernacle, and the pillar of fire by day, a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, the presence of God was in their camp. So the camp had to be cleaned and sanctified. So what made this man unclean? This thing that came upon him by night, a wet dream and nocturnal admission, as it says in some translations, which is very accurate. And we'll get into exactly what that means as we go along. But it has to do with sex. And notice again, so he has to come out and wash himself with water, and he's unclean. He has to take a bath. And then when the sun goes down, he's unclean. And notice when the sun goes down, because that's when the evening starts. Remember, I talked about before the biblical calendar. Sundown is marking of the beginning of the transition. Nightfall ends the transition. So again, when we look at cases where evening of a day is the same evenings count as part of one day of the previous day, it also counts as the beginning of the end of one day and the beginning of the next day, that transition period. So when the sun is down, then come into the camp again, because he has been in a clean state when he's in the presence of God in a special way. And this same thing applies here to believers today. And this little passage here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1 through 5, really lays the whole foundation of sexual health for us in so many ways. And we'll expound upon that as we go along, of course. Now, concerning things wherever you wrote to me, it is good for a man to not touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, let every woman have her own husband. Where the woman render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise the wife unto the husband. The wife has not power of her own body, but the husband. Likewise also the husband has not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud you not one another, except to be for a consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Now, word incontinency just means self-control, okay? For your lack of self-control. Really, it's a lack of self-control, okay? For your lack of self-control. So, let's start being, it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, when I was young, I wanted to know where the boundaries were. I really didn't want to do what God wanted was right, but I went to ministers to ask, they didn't really give, I mean, one guy literally told me it was up to me to decide. At which point, if I'd really been witty, I said, glad you feel that way. Could me and your daughter go for a date? But, but I didn't think of that. I've just been saying to be funny. But anyways, here's the line: not to touch. And it means that in a literal sense. The first grown woman whose hands I really held and stuff was my wife's, and I remember to this day it made my hand feel different. It wasn't just my imagination. A biochemical transfer takes place, and a process starts for binding a man to a woman just by touching her hand, just by holding hands. And it'll start rising, and it'll start rising things. And even at night, if I want to sleep my pillow, and sometimes I hold my wife's hand, and I can't. It ends up waking me up, arousing things in me, and I have to stop doing it so I get to sleep. It means it literally. That's the line. If you're wondering, no contract, no contact. It's really that simple. So why? To avoid fornication. And so what's the solution? Marriage. And notice who marriage is between a man and his wife, a woman and her husband. Not a man and a man, not a woman and a woman, not, or anything else you can think of. Marriage is defined right here as a man and woman, period. Now notice the next thing. And why? And what's the purpose of this? To avoid fornication. What's fornication? Sex with anyone or anything that's not a man. Sex between a man and anyone that's not a woman that's his wife, or sex for a woman with anyone or anything that's not a man that's her husband. Okay, the rest of it's fornication. Any kind of combination you think of. We'll talk about these various forms of fornication in detail, and how they and the effect they have on your sexual health. So now, next thing I want you to notice is I talked about this when I was talking about Paul, the Apostle Paul, Shaul, wrote about marriage. What they had to say about marriage. Look at this. But notice that it's due benevolence. The husband owes his wife sex, and she owes him sex. They're not. One of them's not getting lucky. They're not doing the other one a favor. They're not. This isn't something to barter. This ain't a bartering chip. This ain't nothing like that. And notice it goes beyond that. The wife doesn't have power of her own body, but the husband. She doesn't really have the right to tell him no, and he doesn't have the right to tell her no. Now I know some people are thinking, well, that's not a problem, but yes, it is. So with the wife wanting sex and the husband not, or whatever. Yeah, it is a problem sometimes. And one of the primary ways it's a problem is you get husbands so wrapped up in their careers and whatever, they're working and they're not available. Okay, they're not available there. They're not, so they can't. So that's one of the problems. They're more, and there's a time for them when they can be away from their wife to take care of whatever. There's a time when they can't. We're going to look at that when we get further on. So, so sexual health begins with this whole in a nutshell. Is a man married to a woman, and them taking care of each other at due benevolence at the right time. We'll look at that. And what if they don't do this? What if one decides they don't want to do it? You are stealing from each other. That's what defraud means. Defraud is stealing. You are a liar and a thief if you do not, because you made a marriage covenant, and in your marriage covenant, this is part of it. With this one exception, if you both agree for a time, see, with consent means consent of the other party, both parties have to agree. For what purpose? For getting closer to God, praying and fasting in a special way. Remember, you need to be in a clean state when this occurs. And when you're done with this praying and fasting, you have to come together again. So you got to leave enough space. You got to end your fasting, praying and fasting for a time. Notice, set yourself a time limit. And try to take it from someone who's been addicted to fasting before. You can want to keep going, okay? It changes you. And sometimes you just want to keep going. That's why they set a time limit here. Because you get closer to God in a way that's hard to explain, that you cannot get there any other way. But you got to give yourself at least a day, and I'll explain why a day, before the woman's period starts, so you guys can resume together. So you're not in a place of temptation the whole time she's on it, the whole time after her period starts. So, and this is the same treatment with Passover. Remember, Passover is their special time. They're all close to God. In their case, you had to go in the temple, and you couldn't go in the temple. Mean not the area of the Gentiles, the court of the Gentiles, but the court of the Israelites and the court of the women in those areas, and in the area around the altar if you're a Levite, and so on and so forth. And then the holy place for your priest, and the Holy of Holies for the high priest. You couldn't do that if you're in an unclean state, and the same thing's true here with fasting, okay? So Passover's coming up, and you need to plan to be clean on Passover if you're observing it, because it's a special time to draw near. And I would even say, those who are not circumcised, remember, Yeshua is your Passover lamb, and you're going to do communion. I would say the same thing applies to it as well, because you're setting yourself off a special time for you and God, and you need to be a clean state when you do that. So that means no sex, and we'll look at the particulars of the rules about that. But when do you have to cut off the sex before then, and when can it resume? We'll look at that as we go along. Now we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 15, verses 1 through 4. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say to them, If any man has a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean. This shall be his uncleanness in his issue. Where his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped from his issue, it is his uncleanness. Every bed where he lies has the issue is unclean. Everything where he sits is unclean. Okay, notice this issue is running out of his flesh, or maybe it's stopped, but there's still a thing there. And it could be like a guy cutting his arm, got infected, it's got yellow pus and junk coming out. If you're laying on a bed, that could be a problem. But notice it's really talking particularly about a particular kind of issue. Notice about where he sits. So think about the part of your body that sits down when you're sitting in a chair or whatever, okay? The part making contact with where you sit. That's the area in particular it's referring to that has an issue. A running issue. Now we're going to continue on and look at this. In Leviticus 15, chapter 15, verses 5 through 8. And whosoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean to evening. He had said anything that has the issue shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean to evening. He touches the flesh and has the issue shall wash his clothes and bathe himself and be unclean to the evening. He has the issue. If he has the issue, spit upon him that's clean, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself and be unclean to evening. So notice anything this guy touches, and notice because of what I talked about, remember we looked at where he sits, we're going to see that it's implying, it's mostly referring to something, a venereal disease or something like that, okay? And then, why spitting? Because we talked about how to handle a plague last week. The commandment is to wear a mask over your mouth. Well, this is the reason why. You can transmit this by spitting, and some things you can transmit by being airborne. By being airborne, as we said. So then notice the process. If any of these things occur, you have to wash your clothes and take a bath before sundown, or you're going to be unclean to the next evening. And then you're unclean till the evening, which again we saw starts with sunset. But technically, the even is that point where time between total nightfall and total daytime. But the evening's the process of the transition period. Leviticus chapter 15, verses 9 through 12, we continue about this man who basically has a venereal disease, and we'll see some more about that as we go along. And whatsoever he rides upon that has the issue shall be unclean. And whosoever such thing he is under him shall be unclean till the even. And he that bears any of the things shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in the water and be unclean to the even. Whosoever touches that has the issue and has not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his hands and bathe himself in water and be unclean to the even. And the vessel of earth that he touches with it, which has the issue, shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. Okay, because remember, unclean has to do with filth and disease, filth and death, and we looked at last week, disease as well, right? This guy has a disease why all this thing, right? So that's leaving his body, it's leaving his body is the problem here. So this thing's coming out of him, so it's unclean. And notice here, again, if he sits, anyone that touches this stuff, that bears any of those things shall wash his clothes. Anyone that touches anything, the guy touches those things, we've listed. And I'll notice this thing here. Someone can touch him if they've not washed their hands in water before touching him or after. Okay. Then you have to wash, then you have to do this. And this is why doctors scrub. The father of germ theory actually got the whole idea about germ theory from this passage that we're looking at. And he subscribed, and he told doctors they had to wash their hands. The problem is they were performing autopsies on dead people, then going medical examinations and delivering children in childbirth, and there was a high infant mortality rate. A lot of infants died, a lot of mothers died. And this guy took this passage here and said, you got to wash your hands and stuff first. And he was actually, he's the father, I forgot his name right now, but he's the father of germ theory. And he actually lost his medical license for telling doctors to wash their hands between patients. Okay. But this is where he got it from. And we all know that's the way it's done now. In fact, they scrub themselves up to their elbow and then put gloves on the way up, just an extra measure. Then you throw the glove away. Which again, remember the rule is, notice the same rule about the vessel of earth. Anything that's not made of organic material, wood, skin, blah, 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 cotton, things like that, or that's not made of metal, cannot be cleaned, and you have to destroy it. And that's why you throw away the rubber gloves. They're made of these kind of porous materials. So again, this is talking about venereal disease. So this is telling us how to take care, what to do so the venereal disease doesn't spread through casual contact, okay? That's what all these things are, is casual contact. Because for venereal disease, some people say sexually transmitted disease. So you want to keep that, you want the guy to keep that to himself, okay? Literally. And this is how you avoid through casual contact. These are that's what these rules are, that's what these laws, commandments are telling us how to do. Now we're looking at another form. We've touched upon that. We're going to go into it deeper. That'll make a man unclean as well, as besides having some sort of pus from some sort of venereal disease or something like that. And that's another issue that comes out of him. All right, we're just going to Leviticus chapter 15 again, and we're starting out in verse 16 through 18 this time. If any man see the copulation go from him, he shall wash his flesh and water man clean into the even. Every garment, every skin wherein is the seed of copulation shall be washed with flesh with water and be unclean to the even. And the woman also with whom the man shall lie with seed of copulation, they shall both bathe themselves in water and be unclean to even. Okay, the word sperm comes from the Greek word sperma, which literally means seed. So seed of copulation here is not just referring to it does refer to the sperm cell. Those are seeds, literally. If one of them gets into the egg, it's fertilized, it becomes a zygote, and from there you get a baby. Okay, so, but it's also talking about the seminal fluid surrounding it. And why unclean? Well, we understood. We looked before. Remember when a man spreads himself abroad, poops or whatever, that's unclean. Well, those people can understand that. Yeah, and go outside the camp and bury it and all this stuff. But why the seed of copulation? I mean, it's not exactly filth. The problem is, remember, unclean is associated with filth, death, and disease. It's not disease, but it is associated with death because sperm cells die on contact with the air. And even if the man's and the woman, if none of them got out, and they were all inside the woman, they'll all die in there except the one, unless one of them by chance happens to fertilize an egg, and it'll die. And actually, it'll break off its tail and blocks off, and it'll continue form a zygote with the egg, which the egg's not really alive, which we'll talk about, but until it's fertilized. But the sperm cell is actually one characteristic of life, except for the ability to get nutrition for themselves. So they die. So in any case, there's death here. The man's not just sending out one, he's sending out 80 billion or whatever. Okay. The case may be, he's depending on his count. So again, that's the rule, is the clothes got to be washed. I'm jumping in myself. Yeah, the clothes, the skin and every garment, everything, their bedding has to be washed, and you kind of night clothes, whatever. And the easiest way to handle that is to lay towels down underneath you. And when you're done, you can pick the towels up and wash just them. But otherwise, you got to wash your entire bedding. You have to wash your entire bedding. And you have to take a bath. And until even. So a lot of these people do these things at night after evening started, and they're always clean to they're always in the States the next evening. And if you really want to shorten your time, the best way to do it would be an hour ahead of time. And at evening, there's some sort of, we all know about circadian rhythms and stuff. There is there's kind of a renewal of your body. Starts with sundown, and that's kind of science here behind the evening. Okay, why evening? Now we're going to continue on in Leviticus chapter 15, verses 19 through 23. And if the woman have an issue, and her issue be in her flesh be blood, she should be put apart 7 days. Whosoever touches shall be unclean unto the even. And everything that she lies upon her separation shall be unclean. Everything that she sits upon shall be unclean. Whosoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean to the even. Whosoever touches anything she sat upon shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean to the even. And if it be on her bed or anything whereon she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean to evening. So again, notice particularly the area where she's sitting. Her genital sex organs are right near the surface of these things. And this time about her monthly cycle. It should be put apart. Now, in the context when they originally wrote this, remember they're in a camp. All of Israel's camp is in one giant camp, and God's walking in the midst of it. And she had to be put out, and what they had was another smaller camp outside the main camp where the women went during this time. And they were literally put apart from the camp. Now her husband go over there and talk, and maybe whatever. But he had to be careful. If he sat where these women sat, if any of the men did, he'd be unclean and have a problem. He couldn't go back in the camp till evening. And those the rules are just like as if he had sex with her. He has to wash his clothes and take a bath. Okay. And notice this thing about sitting down is just like the man with the venereal disease, or some sort of issue like that. Anything she sits on, same thing. We're going to continue. And the man who touches those have to do this. And it's for this reason in a lot of American homes. It used to be very common. Very, very common. You go into a house, and at the dinner table, say particularly. There was mom's seat, and each of the girls who were past puberty had a seat, and no one sat in their seats but them. And it became kind of tradition, and most people didn't even know why they did it after a certain point. But they just knew they did it. Well, this is why. It's like when I discuss about being unclean, people don't walk on graveyards and they're marked in with a footstone. They don't know why, but that's why. And it's the same sort of thing here. Now we're going to continue on about this woman. Now remember, she's unclean for 7 days. Let's continue on what it says here. Leviticus chapter 15, 24 through 28. If any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and all the bed whereon he lies shall be unclean. If any woman has an issue of blood, many days out of time for separation, or run beyond the time of her separation, all the days of her uncleanness shall be as the day of separation. She shall be unclean. Every bed wherein she lies, all the days of her shall be unto her as the bed of her separation. Whatsoever sits on it shall be unclean, as the uncleanness of her separation. Whoever touches those things shall be unclean, wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean to the even. And if she be cleansed of her issue, then she shall number herself 7 days. After that, she shall be clean. All right, so there's several things here. But first, I want to start. Remember, the rule is when she starts for 7 days, she's okay. And notice the man, and all it means if their flowers come upon him. It means if she starts her period, her menstrual cycle, while they're engaged in sex. Okay. And notice he's unclean just like her for the same 7 days. And the same rule about where he lies is unclean. Okay. Now, again, this is talking about unintentionally, her menstrual blood coming upon him, upon his sex organs in particular, his begetter. So I call it because you beget children with it, which I'll explain later. So, now we notice the next thing, but what if it goes on beyond that? She's still unclean. It's supposed to be 7 days, but say it goes on. Day 8 goes around, she's still going on. Day 9, day 10. The woman form of the issue of blood, like that 12 years. Unclean that whole time. And all those rules about where she sits, so on and so forth, still apply. Someone touching those things still applies. Now, when it finally ends, she's not instantly clean. She has to wait another 7 days. Then she'll be clean. And that's because this is protecting her sexual health. When a woman's womb or uterus has a lining, and you can think of it like your trash can with one of them plastic linings. And when she starts her cycle, that lining starts falling apart. She's shedding that lining, and the body produces extra blood to whoosh it out, okay, to flush it out. Okay, well, when the blood stops and the lining's completely dissolved, it's all been cleaned out. But her womb is now unprotected, just like a trash can with no lining. So it takes a week, basically, for another one to be built, another uterine lining. So she's not clean, and her husband's not allowed to come out of these 14 days. So if he has business to take care of, where he's going to need to be gone away, what I really need to do is try to coordinate with her in the 5th regular days. But at the worst case, when her cycle starts, start his trip. When it ends, she can call him. Now he knows he needs a week to get home. And he can be with her during the time when it's the right time for love, when her uterine lining is not being destroyed and rebuilt. And again, that's to protect her sexual health, to protect her sex organs. Because God sees these things, we'll go into that a little bit more detail, as sacred. I mean, notice these rules. You don't have these rules about any other part of the body. Sexual health is super important. He just gave us, he gave us a big chunk of a chapter on it. It takes a large chunk of the Bible just discussing it. Okay, we're going to continue on here in Leviticus 12, 1 through 5. And we're looking at some more cases of protecting a woman's sexual health. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speaking of the children of Israel, saying, if a woman have conceived seed, and born a man child, shall be unclean 7 days. According to days for separation from infirmity shall she be unclean. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall continue the blood for purifying 3 and 30 days. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. And if she bear a child that she's been clean 3 weeks, and as in her separation, she'll continue the blood for purifying 66 days. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about the woman in general first. Notice there's two time frames here together. They add up. In the first one, it's just as if she was on her cycle, on her period. And the second one's a purifying like that follows. And there's no sex during any of them. And the reason is childbirth takes a lot out of a woman. She needs a break to rebuild, okay? And for a male, it's 40 days. But as for a girl, it's twice as long. And the reason is women are more complicated physiologically than men. Women are born with a person factory in them. They're born with all the eggs they're going to make. Men create them as they go along, create the seed as they go along, generate it as they go along. It's generated. Women are born with a people factory and 2 nutritional stations for babies. You know, will become nutritional statements, maybe I should say, when they're born. They're a lot more complicated. Men come with a starter kit, okay? All they do is beget things. Then the woman has to take care of everything from then on. So it takes more out of a woman. So she needs a much longer rest. It takes her longer to recover. And again, that's to take care of her. That's to take care of her womb and everything. That's to take care of her sexual health. Now, and God's very serious about this, taking care of taking care of the woman's sexual health. We're going to look at this, about how serious he is about this. In Leviticus chapter 18, starting in verses 19 through 24. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she put apart for her uncleanness. You shall not lie carnally to your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. You shall not let your seed pass through the fire of Molech. You shall profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. You shall not lie with any beast to defile yourself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down unto it. It is confusion. Defile not yourself in any of these things. For these, or on all these things, the nations are defiled, which I cast out before you. Okay, not approach a woman. Again, don't come at your wife as long as she's in that condition. You're not to come at her. You're not to have sex with her. You're not to even approach her. Just try to talk her into it or whatever. You need to be a man and have some self-control. Okay. Because you need to love your wife and you need to be taking care of her sexual health. And notice that this commandment, notice the other things this commandment is tied to. How serious God takes this. He puts it on the same level, breaking this is the same level as committing adultery or homosexuality or bestiality, having sex with an animal. And all those things, of course, are not good for your sexual health either. Or passing or burning your children, giving your children over to a fire, burning your children in a fire to Moloch, to an idol, or profaning God's name. He clumps this, approaching the woman for sex when she's on a period, in the same category as all these other things. And notice these things, defiled. Well, it doesn't just mean spiritually. Remember, the Holy Land, we still call it that, Israel, the land of Israel. God set apart a special part of the earth for a special presence of his, although he owns the earth and everything in it. It has a higher standard there. And that land cannot be defiled by these things. Now, he made people, he knows they're going to have periods, they're going to have and they're going to have nocturnal emissions, wet dreams, or something where they dream and stuff, or they can't reproduce without having sex, and the woman's going to have, that kind. But he's not talking about. These are these choices here, and they defile. That literally means to pollute. Okay, and it's talking about polluting their body, not just spiritually, but physically as well. And we'll look at that in more detail. Okay. Now, we'll continue on here. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 20, verses 15 through 18. Where again, we're going to see exactly how serious God takes this business about protecting a woman's sexual health, about not having sex with her during these times to protect her health. If a man lie with a beast, shall surely be put to death, and you shall slay the beast. If one approach any beast to lie down, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing that shall be cut off the side of their people. They shall uncover his sin. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his iniquity. If a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he has discovered her fountain, and she has uncovered the fountain of her blood. And both of them shall be cut off from among their people. Notice, a man having sex with his wife while she's on her period, on her monthly menstrual cycle, while that blood is flowing, God puts on the penalty is death. Cut off from the people, among their people. At the very least, you're going to be thrown out. But really, the idea is it's probably more like death. The penalty is death. He puts on the same level as what? Incest. Being involved with their children or something. Sexually involved with their children. Bestiality. This is very serious. And unfortunately, for some reason, women feel they need to talk to each other about these things. And it's not that uncommon. People who are against, rightly so, I should add, same-sex marriage and these kind of things, are engaged in this sometimes. And it's just as wicked and bad. God says, protect your sexual health. And if you don't, he says destroy them if they will not protect their sexual health, the woman's sexual health, both of them. And these other things too about this animal. Notice the animal's also to die. Why? You're protecting the sexual health. That animal now has some disease, and the disease can spread to the other animals as well. And so to protect the sexual health, not just of people, but of animals, the animal and the person have to die. So it doesn't spread throughout the camp, or it doesn't spread throughout the herd, or whatever the case may be. God is very serious about protecting sexual health. Now, we're gonna examine some more about some consequences. I mean, why if people don't get caught or something? People might think. Well, let's take a look at that. Leviticus 5, 25 through 28. When the priest shall take the jealousy offering out of the woman's hand, shall wave the offering before the Lord and offer it upon the altar. The priest shall take a handful of the offering, even a memorial thereof, and burn it upon the altar, and afterward cause the woman to drink the water. When he has made her to drink the water, then it shall come to pass, if she be defiled and have done trespass against her husband, that the water, cause of the curse, shall enter into her and become bitter, and her belly shall swell, her thighs shall rot, and the woman shall be a curse among her people. And if the woman be not defiled, be clean, shall be free, and shall conceive seed. Okay, now what's it mean defiled? Well, I didn't have room for everything, but this in particular case, it's talking about a woman who committed adultery against her husband, didn't get caught. Her husband thinks she did, or maybe she didn't, and he still thinks she did. So just like we looked at with dealing with a plague, there's a test given to determine this. And notice if the test is positive, notice what's going to happen to the woman. And the reason why God's doing this is because they're never going to be happy as long as the man's thinking his wife cheated on him. If she didn't, then this will put an end to it. If she did, well, notice she's not going to conceive children anymore. And then thigh is referring to the area again close to the sex organs, and sometimes used metaphorically because it's so close. So her sex organs are going to rot. They're going to become infected, smell nasty, etc. Her belly's going to swell, which looks like she's pregnant. You know, men intuitively, when a woman looks like she's pregnant, they're less inclined to want to beget children with them, because the implication is she's already got a child, doesn't need my services or whatever. So, and she's going to be a curse among the people. But if she's not, then she's going to be free. So, defilement can cause this kind of defilement. Breaking these laws that protect your sexual health can lead to venereal disease or STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. But it's not just for women. We're going to look here in a case here in Psalms, where David wrote in Psalms 38, Psalm 38, verses 5 through 10. My wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness. I am troubled. I am bowed down greatly. I go mourn all the day long. For my loins are filled with loathsome disease, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and sore broken. I have roared by reason of disquietness of my heart. Lord, all of my desires before you. My groaning is not hid from you. My heart pants. My strength fails me. For as the light of mine eyes, it is also gone from me. Okay, notice here, loins. That's a muscle layer right next to a person's sex organs or genitals. Again, often used metaphorically of the genitals themselves. He has a loathsome disease. He's talking about a sexually transmitted disease or venereal disease, which we prefer. And notice it stinks and corrupt, rotted, because of what? His foolishness. His foolishness was what? Defiling himself. Remember, if you go with your neighbor's wife, you defiled yourself. You are defiled. She's not just defiled, you're defiled as well. We just saw the woman's defiled, but so is the man who committed adultery, like David with Bathsheba, who was the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And so he didn't follow the commandments God gave to protect sexual health. And notice what happened. He ended up with this venereal disease. He's in mourning. Yeah, look, he stinks so bad, his friends don't even get near him, okay, for the smell of his wounds. It's corrupt. He's certainly going to be he's now not going to be able to have sex with anyone, just like the woman we looked at. Her thighs rot and stuff. She's going to be cut off from sex because she defiled herself. Well, he's cut off from sex as well because he defiled himself, okay? He's feeble. It's just wearing him out. He's sick. He's troubled. He's just plain miserable. And notice his heart pants. His heartbeats is irregular and perhaps beating hard. But he's weak. And it's even affecting his eyesight. And some venereal diseases like syphilis can cause you to go blind. If you don't protect your sexual health, one of the outcomes is venereal disease or STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. And we're going to show that this is the correct understanding right here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 15 through 18. Know you not your bodies are members of Christ, and shall take the body of members of Christ and make them the bodies of a harlot? God forbid. What? Know you not that he which has joined himself to a harlot is one body? For two, he says, shall be one flesh. But he is joined to the Lord is one spirit. Flee fornication. every sin a man does without the body is without the body. He commits fornication, sins against his own body. So notice, echad, joined together as one. He's quoting Genesis there. The two shall be joined together as one flesh. It's the same word. It's the same word that appears in the Shema. Shema Israel. Yahuwah. Yahuwah Eloheinu. Yahuwah Echad. Literally, pay attention, Israel. Yahuwah, your gods, are joined together as one Yahuwah. The same word. And that way we're joined together with the Lord as one spirit. The spirit's in us. So what does it say? Flee fornication, which is what? Protect your sexual health by not having sex with anyone except your spouse in a marriage that's right. And we talked before about what that means. When we looked at what the Bible says about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. How you can even be married to someone and still committing adultery, like Herod and Herodias. John the Baptist said, Herodias, it was not lawful for him to have his brother's wife, Philip's wife. Now, under Roman law, they went down and they got a legal divorce into the Roman law. John the Baptist went down with that. He was talking about God's law that we've been looking at. And Philip did not issue a decree of divorce. Herod was not free to marry her. And even if he had, he wasn't free to marry her unless his brother Philip had died childless. So they were married legally under the Roman law, but they were committing adultery under God's law the whole time. And that's another subject we looked at before, but that also will defile you, can lead to these things. So what's the problem with fornication? Why is it worse than other types of sins? And fornication, all those things we've talked about. The animals with men, women with women, all that. Is you're sinning against your own body because you're bringing those sexual diseases upon your body. Now we talked about the woman and looked at how serious God takes her sexual health and protecting her sex organs. Now we're looking at the man's and look at his and why. Deuteronomy 23, 1 through Deuteronomy 20, chapter 23, verse 1. He has one of his stones or has his privy member cut off, shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. Okay. Now, I have his privy members together. It's all gone. Then that could happen various ways, on purpose or in a war, an accident, whatever. Okay, but, so, it can even be self-mutilation. But this other one here, wounded in the stones are talking about the gonads. So it would say, might use the word balls, okay, stones, okay, and you're not to wound those, and that would include having a vasectomy. Why? You shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. What's congregation? Now, in this context, it was referring to the temple going in there with all the men of Israel to stand before God 3 times a year and be in his presence in a very special way. Something happens to your together, man. Even if you like a steers. When I grew up, we made steers out of young bullocks. Most of them ended up as steers, and we didn't cut off the whole thing. Any of that, or we just sometimes they crushed them, sometimes they just cut them like a vasectomy. And the whole point was for them not to grow and for them not to because then they'd be more rowdy and would fight with each other and whatever. Okay. So if you made yourself a steer, God says not to do it. Your together is sacred, just like the woman's womb and all of her parts. So he doesn't want you wounded in that. And he takes it, and we're going to see how he's very serious about this. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 11 through 12. If men strive together, the woman of one draws near to deliver her husband out of the hand of him that smites him, and puts forth his hand and takes him by the secrets, and you shall cut off her hand. Your eye shall not pity her. His secrets, that's referring to the whole package. Why? Because, again, no other body part to say this. Then if she grabs him by the ear, pokes him in the eye. Heck, I even say if she tries to cover, if she tries to cut off his oxygen by covering his mouth and his nose with a cloth or something to deliver her husband. But this some of the whole together, stones and privy member, the whole bit. Okay, if she goes around and grabs that man, trying to get her, even though she thinks that other guy's going to kill her husband, it'd be better for her to get a board and hit the guy in the back of the head or something. Okay. Or try to choke him or just whatever. She has touched something that's sacred to God, and now her hand is polluted as far as God's concerned. It's got to go. He's very serious about protecting this. Your sexual organs are sacred to God. They're in a special class, not just with people, but with God himself above everything, all the rest of your body parts. And here's why. Isaiah chapter 56, verses 3 through 5. There let the son of the stranger that has joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, Lord shall utterly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. Thus says the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths. Choose those things that please me, and take hold my covenant. Even them I'll give my house and my walls, a place in the bare named and sons and daughters. I'll give them off an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Okay, whether your stones are cut off, or your prey member, or somehow otherwise your begetter's damaged, where you cannot engage in sex and cannot involve children and cannot create children, you become a dry tree. The seed of copulation is not coming out of you anymore. It's dried up. And it may have been cut off. Because why? What's its purpose? Sons and daughters. Yes, you're not going to have sex every time you have sex. The wife's not going to end up conceiving. In fact, that's a problem sometimes. Sometimes people, they want to have children, they can't. They're just, the Lord shuts the womb. That's the Lord's choice when to shut it up and when to close it and open it. Okay. He'll give you the money. He'll give you the money to means to take care of your children if you'll trust him. If you have more of them, he won't lay on you more than you can bear. He promises that. So in these eunuchs cases, if they will notice keep his Sabbath, not just do those things that are the weightier matters of the law, but do the things that are also lesser matters of the law, as we talked about. They can't be circumcised if their privy member's been cut off. There's nothing to circumcise. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention about the circumcision of the 8th day. That's also for your sexual health. It was back there. I forgot to mention that part. That's also for your sexual health. In fact, in America, it's routinely done. Most states are opt-out states. They used to all be. Now they're opt-in. And what that means is, on your day of discharge, they will circumcise your baby, your male baby, before they leave the hospital, unless you opt out. And the reason we will opt out, one reason is on the 8th day, as we looked at the commandment, which I forgot to go over, it is the commandment of God. And your discharge day may be may be the first day, the third day, depending how the pregnancy went and other conditions. In my case, by the grace of God, it was the 8th day. My father was in the Army, and his unit was in the field in Alaska when I was born. And they didn't want to send my mother home without him being there to help take care of her and whatever. So they had to go, communications being what they were way back in the 1960s, and they had to get it out there and fly up. He was in Nome, Alaska, and we were in Anchorage, about 2,000 miles away. Had to fly up there, get hold of him, find where he was, get him, bring him back. Then my mom would go home. By the time all that was done, it was now a week after I was born, my 8th day, and I was circumcised on the 8th day, again by the grace of God. But why the 8th day God had mentioned, and the reason we do this is to protect people's sexual health. This is what we found. You almost cannot get penile cancer if you've been circumcised. Your chance of venereal disease are greatly reduced just by being circumcised. And for those who don't know what the foreskin is, it's not the glands. The sensor, some will call it a head at the end of a man's begether. Okay, that serves various functions. But basically it knows when to release the seed. It's when the seed of copulation should be released, so the woman can get pregnant. Okay, but what it is instead is a loose fitting wrapping of skin around the whole thing, around the whole privy member, and the trouble is it can trap filth and stuff in there in your urine and stuff, and end up getting infected and be diseased and all kinds of things. That's where we get rid of it. So this talking here about cutting off the incumbents is not talking about circumcision, cutting that, and that's only cutting around. What that literally means. You're going around the privy member when you get rid of this flesh. And also on the 8th day, a man, happens, as we talk, it says the 8th day, interesting, is the day the man has the most vitamin K in his system his entire life, which clots blood. His nerve endings aren't built on the 8th day. Now, I got some friends who are Muslim. They did this in the 13th year when their nerve endings were at full capacity. How terrible. I mean, no wonder they all look. I actually watched the baby online getting circumcised, didn't even cry on the 8th day. So that's what he had to say about that. So I'm sorry, I should mention that when I was there. I just forgot. So I want you to explain, understand that, because that also is for sexual health, being circumcised. So that's why it's done routinely in the U.S. And because it's for the sexual health, and God made people do what they needed. But notice these eunuchs who cannot be circumcised, who cannot even, as we saw, go into his presence in the congregation in a special way. That's only on this earth. It's not eternal. In eternity, he's going to give them a house in his house, a wall, a name. Those who are part of the kingdom within the kingdom, who don't just keep the lesser matters of the law, but also the greater matters of the law, but also the lesser ones, the ones that apply to them they can keep. He's exempting the eunuchs from circumcision because they can't be circumcised. Okay? But they do everything else that pleases him. They're going to have a special place in his kingdom. Okay, we're going to continue on here. Because remember that all these laws we've been looking at are to protect sexual health. They're not about, violating them can have eternal consequences. But the protection of your sexual organs is, in marriage, in the resurrection, we're not giving them marriage. So it's not protecting them from there. Now let's continue on here in Proverbs chapter 23 through 26. We're start looking at how to protect our sexual health. The Bible tells us how to do it. We've been looking at some of these things, but let's just nail it down. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and the reproofs and instructions are the way of life. To keep you from the evil woman, and from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman, lest not after beauty in your heart, your Lord take you with your eyelids. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for precious life. Okay. How do we give life to our sex life? By keeping the commandments of God's law. They show us what to do. They lead us to life, lead us to a good life. And how they do that? They keep us from the evil woman. Notice, a woman who wants a man involved in sex there who's not his wife is evil. The flattering tongue of a strange woman. A strange woman is a woman he's not married to. he's not in covenant with her. Just like the strangers in Israel were foreigners. We talked about before. We talked about we talked about what the Bible had to say, what the Bible said about racial justice, and they've not become part of the people of Israel, but they're into the covenant. So this woman's not in that marriage covenant with you. And that, if you're married or not, I mean, if you're not married at all, and she's still a strange woman, she's on the internet with you. You're not to have sex with a woman you're not married to. So we keep away from that woman. A woman like that's evil. And what's she trying to do? She's trying to get you to desire her beauty and take you with her. She's trying to lure you into this thing. And why? To reduce you to a piece of bread, to get your money. A whorish woman here is someone that's out to get your money, or people may say in the hood or anymore say a hoe. Any woman that's not, they don't say someone's a hoe if they have sex with whether a woman has sex with her husband. A hoe is a woman that has sex with anyone else, and she wants to get in a relationship with this guy. So what? So men will complain with this. Oh man, she's just taking all my money. And it'll cause you not to work right, not be productive, and bring you to poverty. And the adulteress, can even cause you to lose your life, because we saw that the penalty for adultery is death. And all these things can cause, and also these things can cause you, as we already seen, to have venereal disease. They're trying to destroy your life. And the law, the commandments given the law, tell us how to avoid being destroyed. This is our protection. This is how we protect our sexual health, is by obeying those commandments. In Shaul, the Apostle Paul expounds upon this some more, gives him some more tips of how to protect our sexual health. Wherefore, take you the whole armor of God, you may withstand the evil day, having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girded about with truth, having on the breastplate of righteousness, in your feet shall the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, take in the shield of faith, wherein you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So we're going to protect our sexual health by putting on the whole armor of God. And where does that start? We're going to gird our loins, the area around our sex organs, our genitals, with truth. We're going to protect them with truth. And the truth is where? From the word of God. And that would include the law, which we've been looking at. We're going to have a breastplate of righteousness. We're going to protect our heart by doing what God says is right in his eyes, which, see, some people might be like, well, I wish he'd just tell me. Well, he does. He spells them out, what's right in his eyes in the law, which we've been looking at, okay? And what are we supposed to be doing? Our feet are supposed to be ready for the out there, beautiful feet, spreading the gospel. Right there is part of the problem. When David fell in the sin with Bathsheba, we're told his men were out at the battlefield. He's a king. He's supposed to be out there with them, leading them. He wasn't doing his job God gave him. If you're doing your job of your part of bringing the gospel of peace, that's going to cut down your time and your temptation considerably. And you're going to have to notice fiery darts of the wicked. Literally the wicked one, Satan. What fiery darts do? They're trying to burn you and destroy you. You need faith in what God said that leads to action. He told you what to do, how to protect your sexual health in his law, and you need to obey it. And you need to put on that helmet of salvation. What's the helmet do? Protects your head, protects your mind. You need to have your mind renewed. Not even think the way you used to think, okay? Not even think that way at all. Recognize it's a trap that's out to destroy you. And lastly, thrust back with the word of God. That's what Yeshua did when the devil tempted him. It is written, he said. It is written. It is written. You need to say the same thing. It is written, I shall not touch a woman that's not my wife. I will not even touch her. I won't even so much as hold hands with her, because it is written. I will not be involved in a woman. I will not touch a man that's not my husband. It is written. I will not deny my spouse. It is written. I will have sex I will have sex while she's on her cycle until a week after she's done. It is written. When we're tempted, when Satan tries to tempt us, we get back to him and do what Yeshua did and say, Yahshua, if you prefer to use the Hebrew, and tell him it is written. We need to fight back. Now we're going to continue on with protecting our sexual health by the law. Continue in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 through 11. By using the law correctly, I should say. Desire to be teaching the law, understand neither what they say nor whereof they affirm. For we know the law is good if a man use it lawfully. Knowing this, the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly, for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for manstealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and the other thing which is contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust. I'll go into this more in a future lesson. I talked before about Paul and the law, how he's no way contrary, against it. He speaks very highly of it. In fact, he's a champion of the law, which right here he says is part of the glorious gospel. I want you to notice that. The problem is not the law. Sound doctrine is defined by what? The law. The law is good. Who has a problem with the law? The unlawful. Okay? The lawful and the lawless and disobedient. Why? I'm not going to murder my parents. That's a law against that's no problem for me. I'm not going to go out and kill people. A problem like a law against that's no problem for me. Men stealers, I'm not going to kidnap someone. A law against that's no problem for me. Liars, committing perjury, and all those other things, if they be contrary to sound doctrine, which is what? Defined by the law, looking at the context we have here. Now, the problem people have with the law really is these so-called teachers of the law who don't know what they're talking about, what Paul's saying here. The problem is not the law, it's these people. And these people are sometimes violating this down here. Now, they're not usually defiling themselves with mankind. They're not homosexuals. I'm not a man interested in having sex with another man. I don't have a problem with that law. But there's this one there about whoremongers. Wanting to have sex with people they're not married to, or they're not in a lawful relationship, as I even talked about when I talked about sex, marriage, and remarriage. Okay, like I mentioned earlier about Herodias, and they're in a situation. And when it comes to that, to the part of the law, they want to ignore it. They want to throw it out. They want to just some of them want to have multiple wives, which technically is not against the law, but their reasons for it are contrary to the law. They're lusting their heart after that woman, which Jesus says is like committing adultery in their heart, usually a younger woman than their current wife. And these same people who will try to add all kinds of rules, telling people who are like paramedics, they shouldn't work on the Sabbath, which we covered. They certainly should. It's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Will ignore this and try to justify themselves. But that's not using the law lawfully. If the law is used lawfully, it's part of the glorious gospel. And using the law lawfully does what? Protects our sexual health. So that's how we protect our sexual health, is by applying what we've looked at, the law says. Now, we've talked about the consequences of not doing that, some of them. And those consequences range from, well, They range it if it's an accidental thing, in some cases becoming unclean and have to separate yourself for a day or whatever, all the way to venereal disease, all the way to death, okay? Or losing a body part or something, okay? Because again, the Bible, God does not give this kind of treatment to any other part of the body except the sex organs. Because again, that's what you use to make children. He chose the prime directive he gave to Adam and Eve before the fall, before anything, was be fruitful and multiply. Have children on this earth. Fill the earth with people. So, we're going to look at that right now in Romans chapter 1, 24 through 27. Wherefore God also gave them unto uncleanness to the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies in between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worship and serve the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in lust one towards another, men with men worked deceitfully, and receiving themselves the recompense of their error, which was meat. Well, notice this, talking about lesbians, homosexuality, whatever you want to call, okay? But no, even that far, it says vile affections. Okay, this is wrong. One thing, this is wrong on a whole new level here. When you go to animals, it's even more wrong, okay? So a man could have a natural affection, naturally desire women, and be like David, where he shouldn't have been, see Bathsheba, and what she was doing was signifying the time of her purification was over, and she was ready for sex, which is what was going on there with the Beth thing, when he saw her, and not control himself and follow through his natural instinct, which he did. But this is talking about vile affections, unnatural. There's no natural use. You are not born that way. It is against nature. God made everyone. He knows what's natural and what's not. You weren't born. Someone might say, well, I was born that way. No, you weren't. This is a lie in all this uncleanness. Notice uncleanness, vile. This would include not just homosexuality and bestiality, which is even worse, because then you're not even with another human being, right? This is talking about, notice the problem is the heart. The desires of their heart is their heart's wrong. So that's why they would dishonor their bodies by not protecting their sexual health, by being a man with his wife only, a wife with her husband only during when it's the right time of love, right relationship at the right time. The right way, okay? What's driving it? Rebellion against God. And they've changed the truth of God into a lie. They rebel against God, rejected him, and start lying. They say things like, that's your truth, but this is my truth. No, there's only one truth. It's God's truth. He's the Father of truth. That's why I write my blog. Call my blogs the Father of Truth. Anyone disagrees with him is simply wrong. Anyone who says something else is true is a liar. Okay? So, your DNA did not make you do it. God made you. He made your DNA. If you say it did, you are rebelling against God and lying. And all of this stuff, if you think it's okay to have fornicate with people, you're lying to yourself and to God. So let's continue on. Look at these, and because of that, because they did that, they ended up with a just recompense. Those venereal diseases we talked about, and even it can end up mutilation, missing body parts, going blind and dying. Okay, they brought on themselves. That's what Shaul is saying, the Apostle Paul. Now, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 16 through 20. He writes some more about this. These consequences of not protecting your sexual health. Know you not that you are the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? If you are defile the temple of God, him God shall destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seem to be wise as well, let me become a fool. They may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, he takes the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are in vain. Okay, the wisdom of this world will say, get all the gusto you can. Get yours while you're young. Before you're tied down and married, you go out there and you get sexually involved with many women. If you're a man, as many women as you can, or do whatever you want to do for your, then you settle down. Is the word people you see when I was young, they say, well, they settled down, and they got with just one woman. That's the world's wisdom. And it will make you a fool. When I grew up, my brother had a bunch of friends. I promised my grandfather I wouldn't do certain things. I wouldn't do them. And they called me a fool for not doing them. They said I'm just cutting myself off, not enjoying the things of this life, and blah blah blah. By the time I was 25, they were all dead. The cool kids were the fool kids. Okay. The world's wisdom is foolishness. Real wisdom comes from God, and he told you what was wise in his word. We've already looked at it in his law. And notice, if you defile the temple of God, your body is the temple of God. The Spirit of God is dwelling in you. God will destroy you. We'll look at exactly what that means. It does mean with these venereal diseases we talked about, but it's deeper than that. Because, again, your body, your whole body belongs to him, but your sexual organs are sacred to him. And he's very particular about how you use them. Whether or not you protect them. And we're gonna wrap up here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor effeminate, nor abuse themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. Such were some of you. But you are washed, but you are sanctified, but you are justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of God. These things, all things are lawful, but all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but I would not be brought under the power of any. Meats for the belly, and belly for the meats, for God shall destroy both it and them. Now the body is not for fornication, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Okay, there's a lot packed into here. But notice, those that are unrighteous are not that unrighteous. Again, righteous means doing what is right in God's eyes. If you don't know what's right in his eyes, do not be, anyone tells you can do that and still be saved, once saved, always saved, is a deceiver. Okay? If you're a fornicator, which we covered, I mean, that means anyone outside of marriage. In the context of here, it'd refer to someone that's not married to someone else, because they're mentioned out there in different effeminate, adulterer, effeminate. That word literally is a cross-dresser, okay? It's literally a cross-dresser. And it's malakos, it's the Greek word. And it means somebody that puts, and it's talking about a man dressed like a woman, or a woman dressed like a man. You can call it whatever you want to call it. No, you're not a woman in a man's body. You're not a man in a woman's body. If you're not sure, get yourself a hand mirror, look between your legs, see if you have an innie or an outie. If you have an innie, congratulations, you're a woman. You make children. You got a factory, the whole bit. If you got an outie, congratulations, you're a man. But if you're still not sure, get a DNA test. If you have a Y chromosome, you're a man. If you don't have a Y chromosome, you're a woman. DNA does not lie. Okay? The abuse of themselves and mankind. Again, talking about homosexuals and lesbians and the like. If you're involved, if you do not take care of, protect your sexual health, because God made it for his own purposes, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. You are not just going to suffer. You're not going to just suffer physical consequences now, even to the point, venereal disease, maybe even death. or blindness and stuff like that, and caused by venereal diseases, you're going to suffer eternal consequences as well. So they'll say, well, but I've been saved. But notice about those who are saved. Such were some of you. You stopped doing it. Jesus told the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more. And the good news is, if you've stopped and you repent, you're washed, you're sanctified, you're justified. In the world to come, you shall inherit the kingdom of God. Because you stopped doing it. You repented. You return to God. You return to walking in his ways, doing what's right in his eyes. And Jesus paid the penalty of your sin so you could repent. I talked before about this extensively when we looked at the grace of God. God's grace is that Jesus died and paid the penalty for your sins so you could be forgiven, so you could repent and return to God. Now, some will say, well, look, our body parts fit together. Belly's for the meat, meat's for the belly. No, that doesn't mean God. That doesn't mean, hey, I got an innie, she has an outie. Let's hook up. No. If you do that, God's going to destroy both it and them. He's going to, first of all, like we saw David, like we saw the woman, like we saw David with his venereal disease. We saw that woman with the bitter water. He's going to destroy your sex organs, and he'll destroy your ability to have sex. Okay, because your body is not for fornication, but belongs to the Lord, and the Lord's for the body. He's trying to protect your sexual health. That's the reason. And one last thing I want to talk to you about is all things are lawful to me. Now look at this in the context here of obeying God's law, but notice a lot of those have to do with sexual health. And this, people are asking themselves the wrong question. I mean, like when I was younger, I asked myself, I wonder where the boundaries are. I want to know, okay, what can I do and be okay? Well, the thing is, the fact is, a man and his woman, there's a number of configurations. Some people have written, entire books and whatever, showing them. They're actually technically all lawful. We've not seen one law against those things. But that doesn't mean they're not wise. Expedient means wise, okay? And the best question ever is not what can I get away with, but what's the wise thing to do? Not where's the edge so I get as close to it as possible, like we saw the lawyer last week. Like we saw the lawyer last week trying to justify himself with this, and Jesus about this, and Jesus told us about the story of Samaritan. Who's my neighbor? Trying to say, okay, where's the boundary so I can just do my own thing and still be inside God's law, but just barely. The question is, what's wise? Okay, not all these configurations are wise. If a man, it said, remember about homosexual, a man laying with a man like a woman. Well, there's one thing he's not doing, and that's going into the other man's genitals, okay? So it's not a matter of it's lawful, it's a matter of it's wise. The filth that comes out of a man is unclean. If it comes out of a woman, it's unclean. If he puts his together there, he's risking giving her anal cancer and himself penile cancer. Now, has he broke the law technically? No. Was it stupid? Heck yes. Okay. It was foolish of him. So again, you ask yourselves what's wise. And this other thing, not to be brought under power of any, not if something gets control of you and and breaks your self-control, even inside a marriage. Where it just got a grip on you and you can't get your mind off it, and and so on and so forth. And it can wreck you and make you no good for spreading the gospel or anything. Stay away from that, whatever that is. Cut that thing off. And I don't mean your physical body part. That part's sacred. I mean cut off that activity completely. Okay. Now, I'm gonna close. If you go look in Proverbs, you go look at Song of Solomon, he gives you instructions of all the possible. The man had 350 wives and 700 concubines. Or 300 wives, maybe. If there was a man that was sexually involved, it was him. The guy was a sex addict, no doubt. Okay. And he had all these foreign wives and whatever, and whatever configurations were possible, he undoubtedly tried them. You know, there's very little doubt in my mind that he tried them all. But in the Song of Solomon, he describes the very best one, the very best way of the whole process. And it's a little encoded. You have to do some looking under the hood and understand what he's talking about. But if you do that, it is the most satisfying by a long shot. Okay. Not only is it protecting your sexual health, but it's also, by no coincidence, the way the configuration, position, everything, it's most likely for a woman to end up pregnant in, because that is one of the main reasons for sex. Again, not the only reason. We saw this. You owe it to your spouse for how long? Well, as long as you're married. Okay. How often? As often as one of you, the other of you needs it. Why? Because you're like self-control, and to keep you from fornicating. You know, the wife may be like, I can't have children anymore. That's the point. The point is keep your husband from going after a woman, you idiots. I mean, my gosh, what a stupid thing to say. Or a man like, yeah, well, it's just not as interesting to me as it used to be. Well, your wife's telling she has needs. Look, moron, you need to take care of them, okay, in a lawful way, a way that's still in some we've talked about. So the joining of two bodies, then becoming one, is not just about reproduction, but that is one of its primary purposes. And the absolute most fulfilling way that a man who was involved, who had a lot of sex, found, is also the way that is most likely for a woman to end up pregnant, for most likely to conceive. Because that's where it began, was to reproduce. But again, never its only purpose. It's also to bind their hearts together and bind them to each other, that they become one person, not just one flesh during a short period of time, but their lives are joined together. That's why all the biochemical exchanges and all those things that go on. So they become inseparable, even when they're not physically. Even when they're physically separated, their hearts, they're inseparable with each other. It's emotions in their hearts, their heart and soul, with one another. So that's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.